Welcome to Neon Knights. This is a game that was requested by Suba on my Discord, so shoutouts to them for suggesting this game. Now, this video is gonna be a little bit of a departure from my normal reviews, as I didn't really play the game for as long as I normally do when I give actual reviews, and people seem to like these sorts of videos, but a lot of the time the reviews can take a very long time to put together. So rather than doing a real review where I lay everything out and I script the whole thing, instead I just put together some bullet points and I didn't play for as long. So I think I'm going to be calling these more first impression reviews. That being said, before I talk about anything with the game, what even is this game? Well, Neon Knights is pretty self-explanatory. If you've ever played a top-down roguelike game in your life, congratulations, you've played this one. Now that being said, the fact that it's on Roblox to begin with is pretty impressive, as if you're looking at this, you might even question if you're looking at a Roblox game at all, which in of itself is a good thing. So saying that, we're going to start off with the good things, then we're going to move on to the bad things, and of course end with a score. In terms of good things, I already kind of listed one, and that's the fact that a lot of the time I wouldn't even feel like I was playing a Roblox game, and that is a good thing. If you're a Roblox game that can feel like a real game, you're on the right track. It doesn't mean that Roblox games that feel like Roblox games are bad, but it's just saying that if your Roblox game feels like something else, then you're a cut above. And Neon Knights definitely manages to pull that off. There were a few times where I would notice that certain jank Roblox engine related things would happen, like sometimes an enemy would just like fly and bounce around, and it was pretty rare, but when it did happen, it was sort of like a, oh, I'm playing Roblox moment. Or when I'd get an achievement and it would pop up and I'd be like, oh yeah, Roblox. But for the most part, I didn't feel that way, and that's a really good thing. I think Neon Knights accomplishes this by obviously having an art style of its own, as well as completely axing your regular Roblox blocky characters, but I really think the big thing that they managed to do here was to hide their loading screens, which I don't think I've seen any other game do, and it's really impressive that they did it this way. I don't know how easy or hard it is, but all I know is that it really makes it feel like a game when you're loading from one level to another, and it doesn't have to restart the entire Roblox program and pull up another thing. You see the Roblox logo come up. You know what I'm talking about if you've played basically any other Roblox game. And Neon Knights doesn't do this. It all seems to load seamlessly, and I know it's not all on the same server, so I don't really know how they did it, but it's really good. Loading more into gameplay and stuff, and the customization and skill trees as well as the leveling feels pretty well done here, with some exceptions that we're going to talk about in the cons. Generally speaking, character progression feels good. As you go along, it genuinely does feel like you get stronger, considering that you're going through the same levels a lot of times, because every single time you start back in the same level, which is sort of a positive and a negative in of itself. But regardless, it feels like getting through a lot of these earlier sections can be easier the better stuff and the more skills you unlock. But it doesn't get too easy as to make these sections pointless, which is really good. In terms of difficulty, I think that the difficulty so far from what I played felt pretty well done, except for a few things towards the end of my play session, which we'll talk about in the cons. The thing about difficulty is that Neon Knights is not an easy game. You can make this game brutally difficult. But the thing is, that difficulty doesn't come from artificial or unfair difficulty most of the time. Usually, generally speaking, that difficulty can be overcome with skill. Skill that, unfortunately, I don't have because, you know, I'm not super well versed in the medium. But I'm sure people who are can probably bump up the difficulty and blow through some of this stuff with skill alone. And that's really good for a game. I mentioned difficulty in a sort of similar game way back when, which was called Venture Tale, where they hid their difficulty settings way in a bunch of menus and you couldn't figure out what exactly they did and how helpful they were. And that's the complete opposite here. The difficulty is obviously displayed. What it does is also obviously displayed in terms of extra difficulty, as well as what it does to help you for playing on higher difficulties. So again, difficulty, for the most part, very well done. The thing I was the most surprised by was the general hit detection when it comes to enemies hitting you. I've gone on record plenty of times saying that the hit detection for Roblox games is awful, and, well, it is. It's an engine limitation. It's something that developers simply cannot get over. Your latency and such is always going to affect the hit detection, and so games like this should feel bad. And despite that, there were only a few times where I really felt like the hit detection failed me and I got hit in a place where I otherwise shouldn't have. In fact, it often felt like the opposite, where I felt like I should have gotten hit, but I didn't. And that leads me to assume that there's a chance that the developers of this game made the actual damage boxes a little bit smaller than what the damage boxes say they are in order to make it so that way it alleviates some of these issues. I don't know if they did that, but sometimes it would feel that way. Now, when it comes to avoiding damage, that's where we can talk about the movement. And the movement in the game is very simple, but works just fine. You have 2 stamina nodes, basically, and these stamina nodes double as your sprint stamina as well as your dashing stamina. You have 3 sort of movement abilities. Sprint, which slowly drains it over time, a dash, which drains 1 node at a time, and then a sprinting dash, which drains a whole bunch of stamina but covers a lot of distance. You combine all 3 of these movement tools, and it allows you to dodge all the different types of attacks that are coming to kill you. Overall, the movement felt good, and I don't really have any complaints here. When it comes to the enemies themselves, there are a lot of them, and I only played through, not even half the game, so the fact that I can say there's a lot of enemies now and I haven't even gotten to the higher floors of the game speaks for itself. There are a ton of things to fight. They all do different things and serve different purposes, and overall the enemy types is a huge highlight of the game because it doesn't get boring as you're always fighting different enemies that need different strategies to be bested. When you're actually in raids themselves, the in-raid economy for health I feel like was very well done. Basically, every single bit of damage you take is permanent. It's not necessarily permanent because you can get upgrades to heal you when you get to safe zones, buy health from different vending machines. You kind of get the idea. There's ways to heal yourself, but the health isn't going to come back over time. You need to do something to get the health back. This makes every single hit meaningful and makes you always want to avoid damage, no matter what. One of the things that I was surprised by, and might be just a side effect of this being a first impressions review rather than a full-on review after I've completed the whole game, is microtransactions. I expected this to be microtransaction hell, and as far as I can tell, it's not that. Is it pay to win? I would almost bet for certain. But there's no PvP, so who really cares on that front? And number 2, it didn't feel so unfair as someone who didn't pay for anything that I would be forced to pay in order to move on. That might change later on down the line where it just gets so ridiculously grindy that it's impossible and you need to pay, but from my experience, the microtransactions were tame and it didn't feel totally unfair to just play the game like normal. And the last thing on pros is the loot itself. When you're playing a roguelike, loot tends to mean a lot. And in this game, I ran into a lot of interesting loot. There are several different gun types. All those gun types have a whole bunch of different modifiers that can be on them that do all sorts of different things. I can't sum it all up into words, but there is a lot of loot here, and most of the time, the loot is good. You can consistently go into runs trying out different things that all feel different from the last. Now that's all my positives, so of course now we need to run into the negatives, which are inevitable. The first is that you might have noticed that I talked about the in-raid economy for health systems, but never mentioned ammo. And that's because I feel like the ammo situation in this game is a disaster. There are 2 ways to fill up your ammo. You can either kill enemies with a melee weapon, which will give you a small amount of ammo, or pay in-game money that you get in the raid to vending machines to get ammo that way. Now this wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing, but the problem comes from the fact that you have 3 weapons available to you at all times. But when you pick up ammo, it only gives you ammo for the weapon you have equipped. Why? Who thought this was a good idea? I have absolutely no idea. But I'll tell you right now, this was a horrible idea. What this really makes it come down to is either, number 1, a micromanaging simulator where if you want to constantly try to use different guns for different situations, then you need to play this stupid, ridiculous game of switching guns to melee enemies to get the ammo for the right gun at the right time, or what I ended up doing for most of my gameplay, which is just sticking to one gun and making sure to melee enemies or buy ammo for that specific gun, otherwise I'd run out. it doesn't help that the ammo economy for each different gun can be better or worse. If you have a shotgun or a sniper rifle, it's a lot easier to keep your ammo topped off because you're using less of it, so you can use melee weapons and stuff like that to get more ammo over time quicker. But if you're using an automatic weapon, it's almost impossible to consistently keep your ammo topped off, and you'll be running out of ammo in any sort of automatic weapon almost instantly. It's incredibly frustrating. And I didn't really touch on it, but to explain a little bit of how the economy works, when you're going through levels and looting containers, you get money that you can only use in that raid. And that money is important to buy certain things, like modifiers to your character that will help you later, such as being able to heal more on getting to rooms, or shields that will allow you to take extra damage and recharge over time. Really good buffs. But unfortunately, if you're having to run certain ammo types that need to be buying ammo constantly, then you won't have enough money for these things. So again, it just ends up making you write off those weapon types. And so that segues us directly into bad weapon types that seemingly have no reason to exist. I picked up a lot of bad weapons, and if you're gonna have a weapon that's just bad and significantly worse than others, why even have it to begin with? Is it there to dilute the loot pool? I guess, but that's not fun for gameplay. The automatics in particular, if I didn't have this specific modifier on this one assault rifle that made it do more damage the longer I had it out, it would be completely useless. The automatic would be so much worse than any of the shotguns that there would be no reason to use it. I don't think I ever picked up a pistol that was worth a damn, so why even bother having that on? And later down the line, I got this really cool sniper railgun, but it was so much better than everything else I had that there was basically zero reason to use anything other than that sniper railgun. It's just so questionable. I touched on it a little bit earlier and told you that the difficulty for the most part was well done. Well, here's the other part of the for the most part. Difficulty at times can feel incredibly unfair, and it's usually due to incredibly stupid modifiers that I just don't really know what they were thinking. The worst of which I ran into were two of them. One that made the enemies ridiculously fast and almost unreactable, and the other which made enemies completely invisible. I'm not talking invisible as in like you can see their shadow or you can see an outline. I'm talking completely transparent. The only way to find them is to run into them. That is BS. I don't know who thought it would be a good idea to make enemies entirely invisible. And this modifier should 100% be tweaked, so at least you can sort of see what you're trying to fight against instead of stumbling around and then randomly running into it. It just feels like unfair artificial difficulty, and I don't know why it exists. The UI is something that I sort of have to talk about in that it's just too big. I don't know why they decided to make the UI so large and take up so much of your screen. It's fine if people like this, but at the very least it should have had some sort of scaling option, because at least for me, I don't need these huge bars taking up a ton of my screen. I want to be able to see what's going on. And in a game where you can have a lot going on, having good visibility is very, very important. And in terms of good visibility, oh boy, can the visibility get rough at times. Whoever was the map designer for this game did a really good job at making the maps feel good, believable, and just generally look great. Unfortunately, they forgot to make it so you could see. I don't know whose idea it was to make things on the ceiling be visible so that way it blocks your view, but oh boy, does it not work. Not being able to see my character while they're trying to fight is miserable. And while they did do a little thing where if you're behind a wall, it'll highlight and show yourself where you are so you don't get totally lost, it doesn't show the hitboxes, and sometimes if it's something like on the roof that's blocking your view, it won't show at all, and you just won't be able to see. This was the biggest frustration factor for me in the game, where I would take unnecessary damage or die while I literally couldn't see what was going on because it was being blocked by the camera. Now, I also talked earlier about how the skill tree was well done, for the most part. And here we are to talk about the skill tree again. I don't know what they were thinking with this skill tree, but they decided to make it so that unless you unlock the previous node, you have no idea what the next node on the skill tree does. It is literally a crapshoot, and I don't know why. Now, if you had made it so that way the skill tree split into certain paths, and you had some paths that focused on health, some paths that focused on damage, some paths that focused on movement, at least you would have a general idea of what was going on. Or, best case scenario, is just tell people what the things they're working towards do. But they didn't do that. No, instead, you have to guess. So if you buy a bunch of skill points into a certain path, and then you get like halfway in, and you realize that all of the things you unlocked were worthless, guess what? Those skill points are gone. Congratulations, you wasted your time. You could have gone this other way and gotten like more health every time you get to a safe zone or more ammo or something. But no, instead you got a few more pieces of loot. Oh wow, that's really helping me right now. No, it's not. And I wish I had known that before I put points into it. But now it's too late. I already put the points there. And because the game levels you slower as you get a higher level, just like any other game, well, now it's going to take even longer to get to those other things and get the actual helpful bonuses. It's just super backwards, and I don't know what they were doing here. Now, I sort of talked about the repeating levels already, and I'll just be perfectly upfront that I am not a fan of repeating content I've already played. I think it's tired, it's not fun, and it's not inspired in game design. But I'm not going to fault the game too hard for it because, well, a lot of roguelikes do this, so it's not something that I haven't seen before, and I know that it's a existing trope in gaming. That being said, there was a small problem that I ran into when it came to repeating levels, and that's that later in the game, when I would go back to the same bosses I'd already fought, they would take absolutely forever compared to the first time I got there. And it's not like the boss fight got any more interesting or more challenging, it was the same thing, it just took longer. I had to shoot it more times. And that's just not very much fun. Shooting a bullet sponge is not fun, especially when I'm not taking any damage from it. So I'm playing this micromanaging game with my ammo rather than actually fighting the boss because I need to shoot the boss more times. Just not fun. Something that I really didn't think that I would end up talking about in any of these games was the music. Generally speaking, because of copyright reasons and because I use my own music in my videos, I shut off the music for most of the games I play. And when it doesn't let me shut off the music, I just have to mute everything. But for this game, I never turned off the music, nor even checked if there was a music tab, because this game is barrenly silent. It's not like it doesn't have music. It does, I know it does. And when it shows up, it's low key and as far as I can tell, pretty good. But when it comes to general gameplay, you get silence, the sound of the enemies, and the sound of yourself. And that's it. It can make playing through sections you've already played even more sort of drab and boring, and that sucks. I think if the music was amped up a little bit and actually played during gameplay, it would help the general vibe of the game, especially when playing through levels that you've already played. I haven't really talked about the hub world much, and that's because I didn't have a whole lot to say about it. But one of the things that I did have to say about it was the fact that it lacks any sort of fast travel to each of the shops can be a little bit frustrating. I get that the idea is probably to have it so that way you physically go to each shop to sort of keep you invested in the game's world, but to me that doesn't really work out, and it's just a little bit frustrating when I either forget where something is or need to travel a significant distance in the hub in order to get to a place that I want to go. I don't see why, once you've gone to a shop once before, there isn't a menu where you can just teleport to each individual shop, or better yet, just open up the menus for each shop from your inventory as long as you're in the hub somewhere. It's not like you have to go all the way to the play area in order to play. There's a button right there that lets you jump straight into a raid, so I don't see why it isn't the same with the shops. Probably the biggest disappointment for me when it came to the game, though, was the story itself. Neon Knights has an interesting world that they build up with at the very beginning of the game and then just don't build up anymore afterwards. I don't know if this is a Dark Souls situation where there's quote-unquote lore hidden everywhere and it's never told to you or explained, and the only way to figure out what the hell is going on is to look it up on the internet, which if that's the case, that's lame as hell. But it seems to me like they just had this idea, they maybe had an idea of a world, put it together, and then just forgot to tell us what was going on. Or alternatively, you just need to get significantly further in the dungeons to figure it out. And if that's the case, fair enough, I didn't get that far. But working off of the assumption that that's not the case, I don't know why it's so hard to figure out more about the world. why put in the effort to build up all of these different factions and robots and all this crap if it's never going to be explained anywhere, and it's intrigue that leads to nothing? I think the world that the developers have created was more than capable of having its own story mode itself, but rather than that, we just got a sort of generic roguelike game, and that's a shame. And the last thing I had on cons was a questionable readability on some of the enemies' hitboxes, which was pretty rare, all things considered, but there was one enemy that stood out very heavily when it came to that, and it was this one enemy that has an axe and it spins in circles. I don't know who designed the hitbox for this thing, but like it just sort of pops up every once in a while. It makes no sense. I mean, I'm probably showing it on screen so you can see how little sense it makes. I don't know what they were thinking with that enemy. There's some others where it just feels like I dodged that, but you didn't, because it's a move you have to use your dodge instead of being able to outrun. But fair enough, once you figure those out, it's easier. It's just the readability on the first time can be kind of rough. And that's it. Those are all the pros and cons I've had for the game. So what's my overall score? Did I like it? Was it good? Yeah, I think so. And I'm also going to give it sort of 2 scores, because I don't really think it's fair to directly rate this against real games, but I also don't think it's fair to just rate it against Roblox games. So instead, I'm going to just do 2 of them. Number 1 is the rating against real games. And I would say against real games, this is probably, I don't know, a 6. It's a slightly above average game. I'm not a roguelike fan. I don't play a lot of roguelikes, but I know that there are a lot of good ones out there. And the fact that this is free to play is of course a factor, but at the end of the day, if you're looking for some really good roguelikes, I know they exist, and I know you've probably got better alternatives for sure. Is it bad? No. Definitely not. That's why it's a slightly above average game instead of a 4 or a 3, where it's a below average or bad game. Now that being said, we're talking about the Roblox platform, and Roblox is full of garbage. So when it comes to Roblox, I think we're closer to an 8. Maybe a 7, but I think it's an 8. This is a good game on the platform, and I can't say the same for a lot of those. It wouldn't be fair to me to come in here and hand out 9s and 10s to everything that's just good, because even if the platform is full of garbage, it's not fair to just hand out willy-nilly scores based on the fact that everything else sucks. But that being said, it's 100% worth playing. It's free, you lose nothing by giving it a shot, and one of the things that I can probably recommend, even though I didn't do it myself, is to bring some friends along with you. I haven't mentioned it at any point because I played through all of my time by myself, but this is supposed to be a cooperative game, and some of my issues with the game can probably be sort of ironed out by playing with some friends. I imagine the difficulty in of itself and getting further along in the game is probably a lot easier if you're playing with other people. More people, more damage, you sort of get the idea. And I'm not sure if it scales based on the amount of people, but if it doesn't, then it would be a lot easier. Regardless, Neon Nights is not a bad game. Do I plan on playing it more? Probably not, because again, I'm just not a huge fan of roguelike games. But I can acknowledge that this game is worth your time, and if you haven't played it already, I would recommend it. With that being said though, I'm done here. If you enjoyed this video and you found it helpful, you can leave a like and subscribe. If you didn't, you can not do those things and send a bomb to my house if you want, but I'd rather you didn't. And with all those things being said, have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I'll see you guys next time.